As I look back on the events that completely transformed my life, I realize that destiny had always prepared something special for me. Those moments filled with secret desires, forbidden feelings, and intimate thoughts will remain etched in my memory forever. This is a story about how I found myself teetering on the edge between virtue and temptation, between light and darkness. Let my story serve as both a warning and a lesson. My name is Isabella, and I grew up in a strict conservative family where my stepfather, Raphael, was not only the head of the household, but also my mentor, protector, and the ideal man. Raphael was a tall, reserved, and charismatic man. His iron-willing sense of justice inspired in me both respect and reverence. From a young age, I admired him, imitating his manners and striving to meet his expectations. Raphael was everything to me. He taught me to be strong, honest, and courageous. Every day, every conversation left a lasting impression on my soul. His deep, steady voice reassured me in moments of doubt, and his warm yet stern eyes always looked at me with such kindness that I felt completely safe. I remember how we used to sit on the porch of our house, surrounded by tall trees and fragrant flowers. Rafa would talk to me about life, sharing his thoughts and dreams. In those moments, I felt like the happiest girl in the world, aspiring to one day be as wise and strong as him. My mother, Maria, was a beautiful woman with a kind heart and gentle disposition. She loved Raphael with all her heart and always worked to make our home cozy and joyful. But despite her love, she knew that Raphael was the true leader of our family, and his opinion was the most important. From a young age, I tried to be like Raphael in every way. I loved reading the books he recommended, discussing philosophical questions with him, and simply listening to his stories. He was my ideal, and I was sure that one day I could be as strong and wise as him. However, as I grew older, I began to notice new and strange feelings within myself. These feelings were complex and confusing, but I couldn't shake them. They grew with me, penetrating the deepest corners of my soul. Sometimes I felt a strange unease when Raphael was near. This unease was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. The day I turned 23, my life changed. I married Diego, a young and ambitious businessman. Diego was kind and attentive, but something was missing in our relationship. I often found myself thinking of Raphael, comparing him to my husband. Diego was affectionate, but he lacked the confidence and strength that so attracted me to Raphael. These strange and forbidden feelings began to worry me. I couldn't rid myself of thoughts about Raphael, and each day they became more insistent. I understood that my life was on the brink of significant changes that could completely alter my destiny. My wedding to Diego was magical, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The white dress, the flowers, the music, the laughter of the guests, everything seemed perfect, but deep down, I felt an emptiness. Diego was a wonderful man, attentive, intelligent, and devoted. We spent a lot of time together, enjoying each other's company, but my soul was restless. Our home was cozy and beautiful. Diego made every effort to create the most comfortable conditions for me. We had a large garden with roses and lavender where we often spent afternoons talking about the future and dreaming of having children. He was tender and affectionate, but something was missing. That confidence and strength that I saw in Raphael. Diego often left early in the morning for work, leaving me alone, surrounded by silence and my thoughts. In those moments, I often thought of Raphael, his voice, his eyes, his way of being. Everything about him stayed with me like a shadow I couldn't banish. I felt like a traitor, but I couldn't rid myself of these thoughts. One day, in one of those quiet afternoons, I decided to visit my parents. It was a spontaneous impulse, driven by longing and a desire to see Raphael. My mother was happy to see me, and we spent a wonderful time together talking and laughing. But my heart was always searching for him, Raphael. He arrived home late that night, tired after work. As he entered the house, I felt my heart start to race. He smiled at me with that restrained yet warm smile of his, and I felt warmth spread through my body. We sat at the table, and my mother started talking about her plans for the weekend, but I barely heard her. All my thoughts were focused on Raphael. I couldn't stop thinking about how much he influenced me. He looked at me, and I felt there was something more between us than just family ties. That night after dinner, I decided to take a walk in the garden. I knew Raphael would soon join me, and my heart raced in anticipation. When I heard his footsteps, my heart beat even faster. He approached me and stood beside me, silently enjoying the coolness of the night and the scent of the flowers. We were together, and I felt the tension between us growing. Raphael was so close, I could hear his breathing. My body trembled with excitement, and I couldn't hide it. Our hands brushed accidentally, and that fleeting contact stirred a storm of feelings within me. I looked at him, and our eyes met. In that moment, I realized that my feelings for him had long since surpassed the boundaries of filial love. Raphael said nothing, but I saw the same feelings reflected in his eyes. We both knew this was a dangerous game, but we couldn't stop ourselves. That night marked the beginning of our new forbidden path, filled with passion and a struggle with our own emotions. After that night in the garden, I couldn't stop thinking about Raphael. These feelings overwhelmed me like a wave, erasing all other thoughts and desires. I felt that something new and powerful had arisen between us, something uncontrollable. Every time I remembered that accidental touch, my cheeks flushed and my heart raced. Several weeks passed, and my encounters with Raphael became more frequent. I found more and more excuses to be near him, and each time our gazes spoke more than words. I realized that he too sought my gaze, that he too craved those fleeting but significant moments. He looked at me, and each time our gazes spoke more than words ever could. I realized that he too sought my gaze, that he longed for those fleeting yet meaningful moments, just as much as I did. One day when I returned to visit my parents, I decided to stay the night. Diego was away on a business trip, and although I intended to spend time with my family, deep down, I knew I wanted to see Raphael. We had dinner, chatted, and I tried to conceal my nervousness, but all my attention was focused on him. That night, my mother went to bed early, leaving me alone with Raphael in the living room. We sat across from each other, and I felt a tension building between us. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the same thing I felt, a forbidden desire and an inner struggle. Raphael stood up and walked over to the window. I followed him, and we stood there together, silently gazing at the stars. At some point, he turned to me and whispered, "Isabella, you must understand that our feelings aren't right." His words were filled with pain and doubt. I could see how difficult it was for him to speak of this, which only intensified my attraction to him. "I know," I replied, trying to steady the tremor in my voice, "but I can't control it. To me, you're more than just a stepfather." Raphael sighed and closed his eyes, as if trying to suppress his emotions. I sensed that he was struggling with this too, but he couldn't deny his feelings. "Isabella, this is too dangerous. We can't allow ourselves this," he said, opening his eyes and looking at me with a mix of tenderness and pain that I couldn't resist. I stepped closer to him and touched his hand. Our feelings were too powerful to ignore. "Raphael, I love you," I whispered, looking into his eyes. "I can't hide it anymore." Raphael remained still, unsure of what to say, but I saw his gaze soften. He, too, could no longer repress his feelings. He embraced me tenderly, and at that moment, I felt I had finally found my place. We stayed like that for a while, savoring the closeness. "Isabella, I love you too," he said softly, and his words filled me with both joy and fear. "But we must be careful. No one can know about this." I nodded, understanding that our path would be fraught with difficulties and dangers. But at that moment, I was willing to face anything to be with him. We both knew that our feelings were forbidden, but there was no turning back now. That night marked the beginning of our secret romance, a love that changed everything. Each glance, each touch became more meaningful and desired. We lived in constant fear of being discovered, but we couldn't abandon our love. Our hearts were bound by strong yet dangerous ties, and we knew that many trials awaited us. Our encounters with Raphael grew more frequent, each one filled with a hidden passion that only intensified with every look, every touch. One weekend, when I stayed at my parents' house, the tension reached its peak. We decided to spend the day by the lake, far from the hustle of the city and prying eyes. My mother brought a basket of food and a picnic blanket, and Raphael helped her with the preparations. His gaze occasionally drifted toward me, filled with hidden emotions. We arrived at the lake around midday. The sun was already warm and the air was filled with a sense of pine and fresh water. We found a cozy spot on the shore, spread out the blanket, and settled under a large tree that provided cool shade. My mother busied herself preparing sandwiches, and I decided to walk along the shore, wanting to be alone with my thoughts. Raphael joined me when I paused by the water, gazing at my reflection. His presence was so palpable that I couldn't concentrate on anything else. We walked in silence, enjoying the tranquility and beauty of the surrounding nature. When we were far enough that no one could see us, Raphael stopped and took my hand. "Isabella," his voice was rough and tense, "we can't keep ignoring this." I nodded silently, feeling a wave of heat wash over me. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. I reached out and touched his face, my fingers trembling. Raphael closed his eyes, inhaling my touch, and I felt his body tense. "I warned you, Raphael," I whispered, and those words were like an explosion, shattering all our doubts and fears. He embraced me, his hand sliding down my back, and I felt his warmth seep into every cell of my body. Our lips met in a passionate kiss, a kiss filled with all our forbidden desires and dreams. His tongue slipped into my mouth, and I felt a wave of pleasure wash over me. Raphael lifted me in his arms, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling the strength of his embrace. We moved toward the dense forest, each second stretching into eternity. When we reached a hidden spot, away from prying eyes, he gently laid me down on the soft grass, and I felt his body cover me like a wave. His hands explored my body, each touching nighting of fire on my skin. I felt his lips trail down my neck, and my breath grew more and more ragged. Slowly he undressed me, and I felt his gaze burn into me. His eyes were filled with desire, and I saw in them the reflection of my own feelings. Raphael kissed my body slowly, leaving me breathless with pleasure. His lips moved downward, and I felt each of his caresses unleash a storm of emotions within me. He looked at me with such passion that I couldn't hold back. My hands slid down his back, feeling his muscles tense under my fingers. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice full of passion, "you are mine." I nodded, unable to utter a word. His body was so close, and I felt his skin against mine. Our bodies joined as one, and I felt the waves of pleasure wash over me again and again. His movements were slow and deliberate, each thrust bringing me incredible pleasure. We were like two elements merging into one. I felt his breath mix with mine, his hands holding me tightly, never letting go for a second. We moved in unison, each moment filled with passion and desire. I lost track of time, immersed in an ocean of pleasure. Raphael quickened his pace, and I felt my body tense in anticipation. His movements grew more decisive, and I felt a wave ready to engulf me. In that moment, I realized we were on the brink, and that brink was so close. When the wave crashed over us, I cried out his name, a cry of pleasure and release. We reached our climax at the same time, and I felt his body tremble with tension. We remained together, embraced, and I felt his breath, calm beside me. That moment was perfect. We were together, and nothing could break our bond. I was willing to face anything to be with Raphael. One hot summer afternoon, I received a message from Raphael. "Come tonight to the abandoned house on the outskirts of town. We'll have time alone." The place was dangerous and desolate, but his proposal sparked a thrill of adrenaline in me. I knew this meeting would be special. I arrived at the location at dusk. The house stood alone, surrounded by dense shrubs, its walls covered in moss and cracks. When I entered, I was greeted by silence and a sense of abandonment. Raphael was already there, his silhouette outlined against the dim light filtering through the broken windows. "You found the way," he said, smiling as I approached. "Of course," I replied, feeling my heart begin to race. "Are we really alone?" "Yes, no one will know about our meeting." His voice was filled with desire. He embraced me, and we stayed like that for a moment, savoring the closeness. His lips found mine, and the kiss was full of passion and tenderness. Raphael took my hand and led me up the creaking stairs to the second floor. The old steps and walls created a sense of mystery as we entered one of the rooms. In one of the rooms, where an old chair and a dust-covered bed whispered of times long past, Raphael carefully closed the door behind us, leaving us alone in that forgotten world. "I want this moment to be special," he whispered, his eyes locking with mine. "And it will be," I replied, feeling my body tremble with anticipation. Raphael slowly removed my dress, his movements full of respect and admiration. His eyes gleamed with passion, and in them I saw the reflection of my own feelings. He kissed my neck tenderly, and I gasped with pleasure. His hands explored my body, each touch like a bolt of lightning across my skin. We found ourselves on the bed, and I felt his body cover me like a wave. His movements were slow and deliberate, each thrust bringing incredible pleasure. We moved in unison, and every moment was filled with passion and desire. I lost track of time, submerged in an ocean of pleasure. Suddenly, we heard a noise from downstairs, and my anxiety returned immediately. I felt my heart contract with fear. Raphael stopped, listening intently. The footsteps were getting closer, and we both realized someone had entered the house. It was like a lightning bolt interrupting our moment. "Someone's here," I whispered, unable to control the tremor in my voice. Raphael quickly dressed and helped me do the same. We left the room cautiously, listening as the footsteps continued to approach. My anxiety turned into panic. We hid behind a door, holding our breath. Suddenly, the door to the room creaked open, and a man appeared with a flashlight. He was an old caretaker who had apparently come to check on the house. His eyes met ours, filled with surprise and confusion. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice full of suspicion. Raphael quickly found a way out of the situation, approaching the old man, explaining that we were just looking for a secluded spot for a picnic and didn't know the house was being watched. The caretaker, though still skeptical, seemed to believe the story and told us to leave immediately. We exited the house, our hearts still pounding. When we were outside, Raphael embraced me tightly, and I felt his hands trembling. "That was too close," he whispered, and I nodded, understanding that our game was becoming more and more dangerous. We knew we couldn't keep taking such open risks. Our feelings were too strong, but the danger was becoming increasingly real. Everything that had once seemed so exciting and thrilling began to turn into a nightmare. In the weeks that followed, our lives became a tense waiting game, anticipating the moment when everything could collapse. We tried to be careful, but I felt that time was running out. Each meeting with Raphael filled me with both fear and an irresistible passion. One night, after another secret encounter with Raphael, I returned home to find Diego waiting for me in the kitchen. His face was somber, his eyes filled with suspicion and pain. I felt my heart stop. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, his voice calm but resolute. We sat at the table, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Diego began to speak about how he had noticed my strange behavior, my frequent absences, and tense phone conversations. He suspected something was wrong, and his words hit the mark. "You're hiding something from me," he said, his eyes fixed on mine, "and I believe it has to do with Raphael." I couldn't continue hiding the truth. Tears began to flow down my cheeks as I confessed everything. Diego listened in silence, his face growing more severe and cold. When I had finished, he stood up and without a word left the room. I knew this was the end. The following days passed in a kind of fog. Diego filed for divorce, and our lives began to unravel. My mother was in shock when she found out about my affair with Raphael, and her disappointment and anger only intensified my pain. Raphael tried to support me, but I felt our paths diverging. On our last night together before my departure, Raphael and I met in our special place, the old attic of the abandoned house. This place had become our refuge, where we could be ourselves, away from judgment and pain. "This is our last night," Raphael said softly, his voice filled with sadness. "I can't keep putting you in danger." I nodded, understanding that this decision was inevitable. Our feelings were too strong, but the circumstances were more powerful than us. We embraced, and I felt the tears begin to flow down my cheeks again. Raphael gently stroked my hair, his touches warm and tender as always. We remained like that for a few moments, savoring the closeness. Then he kissed me, and that kiss was filled with all our unfulfilled dreams and lost hopes. "Let's remember this moment," he whispered, looking into my eyes. "This will be our farewell night." We undressed slowly, our movements filled with both sadness and passion. We lay down on the old mattress where we spent our last night together. His caresses were as tender and sure as they had been the first time. Raphael moved slowly, knowing this would be the final expression of our passion. I knew this moment would stay with me forever. We remained together, embraced, and I felt his breathing calm beside me. "I will always remember you," I whispered, looking into his eyes. "And I will remember you," he replied, his voice filled with sadness. That moment was perfect, and nothing could break our bond. The next morning I left, leaving behind everything that was dear and loved, but the memories of Raphael remained with me forever, a reminder that true passion and love can be as destructive as they are beautiful. Next story. On an autumn day as common as hundreds before it, the sky was covered with light clouds that only occasionally led through the soft light of the setting sun. The air was filled with the characteristic aroma of fallen leaves, and a fresh breeze whispered the last melodies of the departing summer. Maria, absorbed in her thoughts, sat by the window looking out onto the street. Her life seemed a routine of work and occasional meetings with friends, but today something had changed. Suddenly, she felt an irresistible desire to escape the mundane and embark on a journey to visit her old friend whom she hadn't seen for several years. Javier was not just a friend, he was someone with whom Maria had shared her deepest dreams and hopes. Their bond had always been special, but life circumstances had led them down different paths. Maria remembered how they used to dream of great adventures in a bright future, sitting under the stars on long summer nights. Determined to rekindle that old friendship, she quickly packed her things and set off. The journey to another city was long, but Maria enjoyed every minute anticipating the reunion. She imagined how Javier might have changed, how their connection might have evolved, and what awaited her on this trip. Her heart beat strongly when she finally arrived at Javier's house, an old but well-maintained building with a cozy garden and familiar details that brought warm memories. Maria stood at the door, gathering courage before ringing the bell. The response was swift. Javier opened the door with a wide smile and open arms. "Maria, it's been so long," he exclaimed, embracing her tightly. The warmth of his hug and the joy in his eyes filled Maria with nostalgia and happiness. Thus began their unexpected reunion, promising to be full of memories, laughter, and perhaps new discoveries. After the warm welcome, Maria and Javier headed to a cozy living room. Maria observed with interest the familiar details, though slightly changed: new photographs on the walls, books on the shelves, and numerous travel souvenirs. Javier served cups of hot tea, and they sat on a comfortable sofa, immersing themselves in memories of times past. "Do you remember when?" They explored their adolescent adventures. Maria smiled in response, enjoying the warmth and sincerity of the moment. It seemed as if time had stopped, and they were once again those young dreamers of yore. Suddenly, Javier mentioned his son David. "Do you remember David? My boy has just returned from abroad. He was studying in England. I hope you remember him. He was the little kid who always ran around us when we were together." Maria nodded, remembering little David, who used to be a curious and noisy child. "Of course I remember him. It will be interesting to see how much he has changed," she said with a smile. As if by magic, at that moment the door opened and a tall young man with a confident stride entered the room. Maria barely recognized him. Standing before her was not the child she remembered, but an adult, handsome man with an intelligent look. David greeted Maria with a polite nod of the head and then hugged his father tightly. "David, this is Maria. Do you remember her?" "We were inseparable," Javier introduced. David looked at Maria and his face lit up with a recognizable smile. "Yes, of course I remember you. It's a pleasure to see you again." His voice sounded deep and assured. Maria was surprised by how much David had changed. Wisdom and experience could be read in his eyes, and confidence was evident in every one of his movements. They sat together and began a lively conversation, reminiscing about all times and sharing updates, talking about their achievements and plans. David mentioned that he had just returned from studying in London and planned to stay in town for a while. Maria listened with interest, noting how his passion for life and enthusiasm sparked admiration in her. At that moment, she realized that before her was not only the son of her friend, but an adult man who aroused in her new and surprising feelings. Javier suggested moving the conversation to the dining room, where the table was already set with delicious dishes that radiated warmth and comfort. Maria, Javier, and David settled around a large wooden table decorated with candles and flowers. The atmosphere was warm and friendly, infused with the aroma of freshly prepared food. "I always knew you'd be an excellent cook," David joked, addressing his father as he poured wine into their glasses. Javier smiled in response. "Well, you know I've always liked to cook. It's relaxing." During dinner, the conversation flowed from one topic to another. Maria listened as David spoke of his experience living abroad, studying, and all the impressions he had brought with him. He talked about the people he met, the culture that impressed him, and his plans for the future. Life in London was incredible, David said with a sparkle in his eyes, but now I'm happy to be back home and to apply everything I've learned here. Maria admired his enthusiasm and maturity, noting that David not only recounted his achievements with passion, but also showed a sincere interest in her life, her work, and her hobbies. He listened attentively, asking questions and keeping the conversation in such a way that she felt heard and understood. You've always loved to travel, David recalled when Maria mentioned her recent trips. What places have impressed you the most? Maria shared her stories with pleasure, feeling the connection and understanding they shared, reminiscent of times long past, yet vibrantly present. A special connection formed between them. The mutual respect and interest in each other created an atmosphere of comfort and warmth. Javier, observing them, just smiled, glad that his old and new friends found common ground and enjoyed each other's company. At one point, Javier excused himself and went to the kitchen to prepare the dessert, leaving Maria and David alone. Their conversation became more personal and deep. David spoke of his dreams and hopes, and Maria of her aspirations and life lessons. Each word, each smile, and each look intensified their mutual attraction. Maria felt her heart beat faster with each exchange of glances. There was a spark that could not be ignored. When Javier returned with the dessert, Maria and David already knew that this encounter would not just be a pleasant memory of the past. It was the beginning of something new, intriguing, and perhaps destined. When dinner came to an end, Javier suggested moving to the living room where the fireplace was, already burning, creating a cozy atmosphere. Maria and David settled on the comfortable sofa, while Javier sat in a nearby armchair holding a glass of wine. "I'll be right back. I need to check something in the office," said Javier, standing up and leaving, Maria and David alone in the room. Silence reigned, only broken by the crackling of the wood in the fireplace. David turned to Maria, his eyes shining with the soft light of the fire. "You have changed so much since the last time I saw you," he said, his voice warm and sincere. Maria smiled, feeling her heart start to beat faster. "And you too, David. I remember you as a child, and now you are a confident and mature man." David blushed slightly, but his smile widened. "Living abroad changes a lot, but I am happy to have returned and to be among my own again." The conversation flowed smoothly from one topic to another. They talked about their dreams, goals, and memories of the past. David shared his travel experiences and how each new city and meeting with new people changed his perspective. Maria, for her part, shared her life lessons and how she had faced difficulties and found joy in the little things. With each word, their connection deepened. They opened up to each other, sharing what is normally kept secret. This created an atmosphere of trust and mutual understanding. Suddenly, David became serious. "Maria, have you ever thought about why we are attracted to certain people? Why some encounters remain in the memory forever?" Maria pondered for a moment, then replied, "I think it has to do with how we feel around those people. If they make us feel alive, authentic, that stays with us forever." David nodded, his gaze becoming even more penetrating. "You have always made me feel that way. Even when I was a child, I knew you were special." These words awakened mixed feelings in Maria. She felt warmth and gratitude, but also embarrassment. Looking into his eyes, she realized that there was something more than just friendship between them. Javier returned, interrupting their conversation. "Well, let's go for a walk. The night is so beautiful," he suggested. Maria and David agreed, and the three of them stepped out into the fresh night air. The walk through the city at night was filled with laughter and lively conversations. But Maria and David knew that after that night, their lives would never be the same. Maria, Javier, and David stepped out into the fresh night air, caressed by a gentle breeze that brought with it the aromas of autumn. The streets were illuminated by the soft light of lanterns reflected on the wet pavement from recent rain. The city looked like a tranquil, cozy, and slightly mysterious postcard. Javier walked ahead, guiding them through familiar streets that Maria and David had not visited in a long time. They passed the park where they used to play as children and the old cinema that was now closed. The conversations flowed easily, shifting from nostalgic memories to modern realities. "Do you remember how we used to run through this park when we were kids?" Javier asked, pointing to some old swings. Maria and David nodded in unison, smiling. Those were warm and precious memories. Maria walked alongside David, and each of their steps, each glance seemed filled with special meaning. She felt a strange excitement that had not left her since they had been alone in the living room. David also felt that tension, but tried not to show it, keeping the conversation going. "I've always liked these nights," said David, breathing in the air. "They remind me of how important it is to appreciate the simple moments in life." Maria nodded. "Sometimes we get carried away by the daily routine and forget to enjoy what we already have." Walking through the narrow streets, they arrived at the Malacan, where the river flowed quietly under an old bridge. Javier stopped and said, "I'm going to buy some hot chocolate. You guys walk around here a bit." Maria and David stayed alone, standing by the railing of the bridge and watching the twinkling lights on the water. The silence between them was comfortable, and each enjoyed the moment. "Maria, have you ever wondered why we are so attached to our memories?" David asked, turning slightly towards her. "Memories are what shape us, what make us who we are," Maria, looking at the lights reflected in the water, replied. "They remind us of what we have lived and help us understand what we want in the future." David nodded. "Yes, you're right, but sometimes memories can also be a source of pain, reminding us of what we have lost." Maria looked at him and saw deep sadness in his eyes. "David, you've been through a lot in these years, haven't you?" He nodded, not taking his eyes off her. "Yes, there have been many difficult moments, but I believe that everything that happens for a reason." Maria felt a strong desire to support him, to make him understand that he was not alone. She carefully took his hand. "You're not alone. You have people who care for you and value you." David squeezed her hand in response, and in that moment, a feeling of deep understanding and mutual support emerged between them. Javier returned with hot chocolate, and they continued their walk, enjoying the warmth of the drink and the comfort of the night city. Maria knew that this night would stay in her memory forever. The night she began to see David under a new light, not just as the son of her friend, but as someone with whom she shared deep and unexpected feelings. After the walk along the Malacan and the conversation about life, the three friends decided to return home. Javier's house welcomed them with a warm and cozy light, the same one they had left only an hour before. Maria felt a bit tired, but at the same time was filled with energy from the evening they had spent. David suggested going to his studio to show Maria his latest works. "You have to see this," said David with enthusiasm. Maria, spurred by curiosity and the desire to continue talking, accepted without hesitation. They crossed the garden adorned with bright autumn flowers and stopped in front of a small building at the back of the yard. David opened the door and invited Maria into the studio. It smelled of fresh paint and wood. The walls were decorated with paintings and sketches, and in the center of the room were several sculptures. "This is my little world," said David, his eyes shining with pride and inspiration. "Here I can be myself and express my feelings through art." Maria was impressed. She walked slowly through the studio, observing each detail. "It's impressive, David. Your works are full of emotions and depth." David moved closer, stopping by one of his sculptures. "This piece is especially important to me. It's about the connection between people, about those feelings we sometimes hide, but that shape us." Maria felt the tension between them grow. She approached one of the paintings to see it more closely and felt David's presence at her side. Her heart started to beat faster. "You are really talented," she whispered, feeling her voice tremble. David touched her gently on the shoulder, and Maria turned toward him. Their gazes met, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. They were so close to each other that Maria could feel his breath on her skin. "Maria," said David, his voice low and serious. He couldn't finish the sentence because at that moment they were overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. David leaned in gently and kissed her. It was a soft yet passionate kiss, filled with long-awaited feelings and hidden desires. Maria responded to the kiss, feeling her heart race. In that moment, all her doubts and fears disappeared. She knew it wasn't right, but she couldn't stop. All that mattered was what she felt while being with David. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "David," Maria whispered, trying to gather her thoughts, to order her thoughts. There is no need for words." David interrupted her. "I know, and I know this is wrong, but I cannot deny what I feel." Maria looked into his eyes and saw the same struggle that was in her soul. They were so close, feeling each other's warmth, and at that moment, Maria understood that their lives would never be the same again. The studio, filled with art and inspiration, became the place where they revealed their true feelings. Maria knew that difficult decisions and complicated conversations awaited them, but at that moment, the only thing that mattered was their connection and the fact that they had finally allowed their feelings to come to light. After the passions calmed down and their breathing normalized, Maria and David looked at each other with understanding and concern. The sense of the forbidden and the extraordinary had enveloped them, but the awareness of the possible consequences began to weigh on their minds. "We can't continue like this," Maria whispered, looking away. "I am married, and you are the son of my best friend. This is wrong." David nodded, acknowledging the truth. "I know, Maria, but what are we going to do now? These feelings will not disappear on their own." Maria sighed deeply, knowing that a difficult conversation with her husband awaited her. The internal conflict tore her apart. On one hand, there was the feeling of guilt and obligation towards her family, and on the other, the new feeling towards David that she could not ignore. "I need time to think about all this," she said, trying not to look him in the eyes. "I don't want to make hasty decisions." David approached and gently took her hand. "I understand, Maria. I don't want you to suffer, but you know I will always be here, no matter what you decide." They spent a few minutes in silence, simply holding hands and enjoying the last moments of intimacy. Then Maria gently released his hand and headed towards the exit of the studio. When they returned to the house, Javier was already preparing tea in the kitchen. He greeted them cheerfully, not noticing the changes in their mood. Maria tried to appear as natural as possible, hiding her internal conflict. The night ended quietly and peacefully. Maria said goodbye to Javier and David, struggling not to reveal her true feelings. On the way home, her thoughts were full of doubts and concerns. How could she explain to her husband what had happened? And most importantly, how to find a way out of this complicated situation without causing pain to the people she loved? At home, Maria could not sleep for a long time. She was tormented by memories of the kiss and David's glances that still burned in her memory. She knew she had to be honest with herself and with her husband, but how to find the right words? The next day, Maria decided to talk to her husband. She knew it would be painful, but continuing to live in the lie was impossible. At night, after dinner, she asked her husband to sit at the table and began her story. "I have something to tell you," she began, feeling her heart shrink with nervousness. "Yesterday, I met with Javier and his son David. We talked a lot, remembered the past, but something happened that I cannot ignore." Her husband listened attentively, his gaze alert and a bit worried. Maria continued, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "David and I felt something more than friendship. We kissed." The words were difficult for her, but she knew she had to be honest. A heavy silence reigned in the room. Her husband remained silent for a long time, assimilating what he had heard. Then, with a deep sigh, he asked, "What does this mean for us?" Maria did not know the answer. She understood that their relationship would never be the same, but she also knew that this conversation was the first step towards honesty and possibly towards a new beginning. "I don't know," she replied, feeling tears fill her eyes, "but I want to solve this with you. I don't want to lose our family, but I can't ignore what happened." Her husband nodded, his face expressing a mix of pain and determination. "We will get through this," he said quietly, "but it won't be easy." Maria knew that a long and difficult path awaited them, but she was willing to fight for her happiness and for her family. Several days passed after the sincere conversation with her husband. Maria felt exhausted and tense, but also a bit relieved. The truth had come out, and now they could move forward. Her husband, Alejandro, was a deep and wise man, willing to fight for their marriage despite the best betrayal. At night, after work, they sat down at the table again to discuss what to do next. Alejandro, as always, was calm and reasonable, although Maria saw how much her words had hurt him. Maria Alejandro began looking her in the eyes. "I've thought a lot about this. We both know that our marriage has not been perfect, and we have many things to discuss and correct. But I want to try. Do you want it too?" Maria looked at him, her heart full of mixed feelings, guilt, gratitude, and hope. Yes, Alejandro, I want to try. I know I made a mistake, but I am willing to work on us. Alejandro nodded, his gaze full of determination. We must be honest with each other and work on our problems. Maybe we should go to a couples therapist. Maria agreed, knowing that this would help them better understand their feelings and find a common language. They decided to start regular sessions with a specialist to understand how to rebuild trust and strengthen their relationship. Over the following weeks, they actively worked on their marriage. The couples therapist helped them reveal many emotions and hidden issues that had gone unnoticed for a long time. Maria and Alejandro learned to understand each other better, to express their feelings, and to be more open. Meanwhile, Maria avoided meeting David. She knew that those feelings were strong but wrong. Her priority was to restore her family and correct her mistakes. However, thoughts about David did not leave her, which became an additional test for her determination. One night, when Maria returned home after another session with a therapist, Alejandro was waiting for her with an unexpected proposal. Maria, I think we need some time apart to understand our feelings and discover what we really want. I propose that we take a small break and live separately for a while. Maria was surprised, but deep down she understood that this could help both of them. You're right, Alejandro. This could give us the opportunity to think and understand what is important to us. They decided that Maria would temporarily move to her friend's house to give both of them the necessary space to reflect. This decision was difficult, but they knew it could be an important step towards recovering their relationship. During this time of separation, Maria continued working on herself, attending therapy, and reflecting on her feelings. She spent a lot of time alone, thinking about her life, her marriage, and the feelings that had arisen for David. One day, while walking through the park, Maria accidentally crossed paths with David. Their gazes met and Maria felt her heart beat faster. David, she began, trying to remain calm. We need to talk. They found a quiet spot on a bench and sat down. David listened attentively while Maria told him about her decisions and feelings. David, I still feel something special for you. But now I must focus on my marriage. We cannot be together while I do not understand what I really want. David nodded, his face expressing understanding and sadness. I understand, Maria. I don't want to interfere between you and your husband, but I want you to know that I will always be here if you need to talk. Maria felt relief at hearing these words. Thank you, David. I appreciate your understanding and support. They hugged to say goodbye, and Maria returned home with a new understanding of what she needed to do. Her path to recovering her family and finding herself was difficult, but she knew it was necessary to find true happiness and harmony in her life. The temporary separation gave Maria and Alejandro the opportunity to deepen their feelings and understand what they wanted. From her relationship, Maria moved in with her friend Elena, who supported her during this difficult period. Several weeks passed, and Maria reflected daily on her life, her marriage, and her feelings towards David. She spent a lot of time alone reading books, walking through parks, and writing her thoughts in a journal. These moments helped her better understand her needs and desires. One night, while sitting on Elena's apartment balcony enjoying the sunset, she received a call from Alejandro. His voice was calm and serious. Maria, I think we need to meet and talk. I have also learned a lot during this time. Maria agreed, and they arranged to meet the next day at their favorite cafe. She felt a mix of nerves and hope, but knew that this conversation would be an important step towards the recovery of their relationship. The cafe had a cozy atmosphere. Maria arrived first and sat at a table by the window, enjoying the view of the street. Soon Alejandro arrived, looking calm and serene. Hello, Maria, he said, sitting down opposite her. I'm glad we decided to meet. We have a lot to discuss. Maria nodded, and they began to talk. Alejandro shared his thoughts and feelings, acknowledging that their relationship really needed changes. He realized that their marriage had fallen into routine, and they both had stopped paying enough attention to each other. Maria, I want us both to be happy. If we need to change something, I'm willing, but I want us to work on this together, said Alejandro, his voice full of determination. Maria felt warmth and support in his words. I want that too, Alejandro. I understand I made a mistake, but I am willing to work on us. I needed this time to realize what I truly value. They discussed their problems and possible solutions. Alejandro proposed some ideas to improve their communication and add variety to their life. They decided to continue attending couples therapy and work on their relationship. After this conversation, Maria felt that a new spark had emerged between them. They began spending more time together, going on dates, engaging in shared activities, and talking openly about their feelings. Alejandro became more attentive and affectionate, and Maria made an effort to be more open and sincere. One night, while sitting on the sofa watching a movie, Alejandro suddenly said, "Maria, I know we still have a long way to go, but I'm glad we've decided to travel it together. I love you, and I'm willing to fight for us." Maria smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Alejandro, and I believe we can overcome all difficulties if we are together." These words marked a new beginning for them. Maria and Alejandro decided to give their marriage a second chance, but this time they were willing to work on it and cherish every moment they spent together. Maria also understood that her feelings towards David had been an important lesson. They helped her realize the importance of being honest with herself and not fearing changes. She thanked David for being by her side during that difficult time, but now she knew her place was with Alejandro. Thus, Maria and Alejandro began a new stage in their lives, full of hope and opportunities to grow. Time passed, and Maria and Alejandro gradually restored their trust and mutual understanding. Their efforts were not in vain. They learned to listen to you and understand each other better. They shared their dreams and fears. The visits to the couple's therapist helped uncover deep issues and find ways to resolve them. One night, several months after the start of their new life, Maria and Alejandro were sitting on the terrace of their house. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses. Alejandro held a cup of tea, and Maria a book she was reading. They enjoyed a peaceful evening in each other's warmth. Alejandro Maria began, setting the book aside. "I want to talk about the future." Alejandro turned to her, his eyes expressing interest and attention. "Of course, Maria. What do you have in mind?" Maria sighed, gathering her thoughts. "I've thought a lot about what has happened in the last few months. I've realized that it's important not only to be together, but also to develop as individuals and support each other in our projects." Alejandro nodded, his face serious and thoughtful. "You're right. We should not only maintain our relationship, but also help each other grow. What do you propose?" Maria smiled, feeling a new ray of hope within her. "I want to start my own business. I've always dreamed of having my own jewelry workshop. I want to do what I love and grow in that field." Alejandro took her hand and squeezed it gently. "That's a wonderful idea, Maria. I support you in everything, and I know you will succeed. We can work together to make your dream a reality." Maria felt her heart fill with gratitude and love for Alejandro. "Thank you, Alejandro. Your support means a lot to me." Thus began a new stage in their lives. Maria opened her own workshop, and Alejandro helped her every step of the way, providing support and inspiration. Their joint efforts led to success, and soon Maria's workshop became popular in their city. Maria was happy to be doing what she loved and to see how her creativity brought joy to people. At the same time, their marriage strengthened. Maria and Alejandro learned to cherish every moment together and plan their future. They traveled frequently, discovering new places and cultures, which brought them even closer. Once during one of those trips, Alejandro suggested they celebrate their renewed relationship. They chose a cozy restaurant by the sea, where the night was filled with laughter, warm memories, and plans for the future. Alejandro Maria said, looking at the starry sky, "I'm so grateful that we found the strength to overcome all trials and start anew. I feel that now everything will be fine." Alejandro hugged her, his eyes shining with happiness. "I believe it too, Maria. We have become stronger thanks to all the difficulties, and now we have everything to be happy." The night came to an end, and they returned to their hotel, feeling their hearts full of love and gratitude. Maria knew that many challenges and joys awaited them, but now they were ready to face them together. Their journey towards a new beginning became a symbol of their love and determination. Maria and Alejandro found the strength to overcome difficulties and create a new, stronger, and happier family, and this new beginning became a gift that both would cherish and nurture day by day.